Okay, today I'm going to continue and about 25 minutes. Part 8. Did the Phoenician work for King Solomon's reign? Did the Phoenicians work for King Solomon's reign? To understand who these unique people were, it is best to lay the foundation on what the historians say about them. Let us start with Herodotus, the Histories 3-115. Of the extreme tract of Europe toward the west, I cannot speak with any certainty, for I do not allow that there is any river to which the barbarians, barbarians, give the name of Eridanus, emptying itself into the northern sea, whence, as the tale goes, amber, orange is produced. Nor do I know of any islands called the Casterides, Tin Island, whence the tin comes, which we use, for in the first place the name Eridanus is manifestly not a barbarian word at all, but a Greek name where done settled before, invented by some poet or other, and secondly, thought I have taken vast pains. I have never been able to get an assurance from an eyewitness that there is any sea on the farther side of Europe. Herodotus was grossly wrong. Nevertheless, tin and amber do suddenly come to us from the ends of the earth. Comment by the researcher. To understand what Herodotus said, we need to look at another historian's work, this time in Stable's Geography 3.5.11. The Casterides Islands are 10 in number and lie near each other in the ocean towards the north from the haven of the Altabri, far northwest corner of Iberia, Spain. One of them is desert, but the others are inhabited by men in black cloaks, clad in tunics reaching to the feet, girt about the breast, and walking with staves, thus resembling the furies we see in tragic representations. They subsist by their cattle, leading for the most part a wandering life, a Hebrew concept. Of the metals they have tin and lead, which with skins they barter, trade with the merchant for earthenware, salt, and brazen vessels. Formerly the Phoenicians alone carried on this traffic from Gadis, concealing the passage from everyone, and when the Romans followed a certain shipmaster, that they also might find the market. The shipmaster of Jersey purposely ran his vessels upon a shore, leading on those who followed him into the same destructive disaster. He himself escaped by means of a fragment of the ship and received from the state the value of the cargo he had lost. The Romans, nevertheless, by frequent effort, discovered the passage, and as soon as Publius Crassus, passing over to them, perceived that the metals were dug out at a little depths, and that the men were peaceably positioned, he declared it to those who allegedly wished to traffic in this area, this sea, for profit, although the passage was longer than that to Britain. Thus far concerning Iberia and adjacent island, comment by the researcher. Publius Crassus lived during the time of the Punic Wars between Rome and Carthage, which consisted of three great wars taught from 246 to 188 BCE. Carthage, Latin, Carthago, Phoenician, Cart, Hadast, New City, was the center or capital city of the ancient Carthaginian civilization on the eastern side of the Lake of Tunis, in what is now the Tunis Governorate in Tunisia, the northernmost country in Africa. The city developed from a Phoenician colony into the capital of an empire dominating the Mediterranean Sea during the first millennium BCE. It is important to note that the Romans were not sailors at all. They had no military navy before this time. It was out of their necessities to wage the wars that through the much trial and error they developed a navy and the skills required to fight with the skillful Phoenicians at sea. The Romans did not venture into the New World. Thus there is very limited information in their history about the New World. Many commentators and historians simply take it for granted that the Greek name Casterides, or Tin Island, applied to the island which are now known as the Sicily Islands. However, the Sicily Islands are not 10 in number but 27, including hundreds of rocks and small islet. Furthermore, the route from the Altabri, far northwest corner of Iberia, Spain, to the Sicily Island is much shorter than the route to Britain and certainly not longer. Therefore, the notion that the Casterides are the Sicily Island is outright rejected. It cannot be proven, but it firmly believed that the Sicily Island, a place where this Phoenician sea captain described by Strabo, ran his boat onto the rocks rather than circumnavigating them to reach some point in Wales north of them, and around the northern side of the peninsula called Cornwall today. The Casterides, with absolute certainty, are the promontories and islands of Wales and especially of Cornwall. The notes of Professor George Rawlinson, a professor of ancient history, mention the locations of Eridanus and Casterides in his translation of the historical passage of Herodotus. On the mention of the Eridanus, and amber trade. Here, Herodotus is much, excuse me, no, no, okay, on the mention of the Eridanus and amber trade. Here, Herodotus is overcautious and rejected as feeble what we can see to be truth. The Amber district upon the Northern Sea is the coast of the Baltic about the Gulf of Danzig and the mouths of the Bistura and Niemen, which is still one of the best amber regions in the world. The very name Eridanus Rangers there in the Roduan, the small stream which washes the west side of the town of Danzig. The word Rodernus, seems to have been applied by the early inhabitants of Europe to great and strong running rivers. Now on the mention of the Casterides, this name was applied to the Cyrene or Sicily Isles, and imperfect information respecting the site of the mines of tin led to the belief that they were there instead of on the mainland of Cornwall. In other words, Professor Lawrenson understood what most scholars before him did not, that the Casterides were Wales and Cornwall, and not the Sicily Island. The natural history of Sicily discusses the geology of the Sicily Island and compares them to the nearby Cornwall. Minerals in granite, the Cironians granite you see now was a few kilometers underground when it solidified, a process which took millions of years. The chemical composition of the granite shows that it was formed from rocks that melted deep in the earth's crust. Whilst still molten, the cooling granite was stressed by Earth's movement, leading to flow and alignment of early formed crystals in the granite. Similar movement after it had solidified made cracks and joints. These cracks have since been exploited by weathering and erosion, forming the spectacular tors seen around the island. In some places, minerals crystallized out from fluid injected into the cracks. Over much of Cornwall, this fluid contained commercially valuable metals, such as tin and copper. The Sicily pollution is usual as it seems to lack these metal ores, but it does have veins of white quartz and black fibrous tourmaline. Excuse me. Okay, continue. There is no tin in the Sicily Island period. This is confirmed by other sources such as Wikipedia under the Earth entry mining in Cornwall and Devon. On the other hand, one can see that there is plenty of tin in Cornwall, and more importantly, evidence that it was mined throughout the second millennium BCE. In Book 4 of his Histories, chapter 4, 152, Herodotus is writing about a period much earlier than his own, even predating the Trojan War, 13th to 12th century BCE, where he is discussing the settlement of various islands around Greece and elsewhere in the Mediterranean by the Phoenicians, and especially the island called Thera, describing a certain voyage undertaken by a man called Corobius, Herodotus, and says that storm not abating, they were driven past the pillars of Heracles, and at last by some special guiding province reached Tartetus. This trading town was in those days in virgin port, unfrequented by the merchant. The Trojan War was 200 years before King Solomon's ships ruled 970 to 931 BCE. So perhaps Herodotus was correct. Surely Herodotus calling Tartessus a trading town confirms the scriptural record. In their Greek-English lexicon, the learned Liddell and Scott readily identify as the Tarshish of Scripture. Herodotus believed Tartessus, Tarshish, to have been settled by Phoenicians not long before the Trojan War, and from geology we know that Thera had been completely destroyed in the middle of the second millennium BCE by a massive volcanic explosion, the Minoan eruption, which had happened around the time of the Exodus. That eruption was as many as 4 times greater than the famous recent eruption at Krakatoa, which was outrageously big. Suben Longshanks makes this statement: the Phoenicians who settled it, therefore, must have found it empty, and they must also be those same people who inhabited the coast of Phoenicia at the same time, which were the Israelites of the Bible. This is a radical statement by Longshanks, but further below the researcher gives more information from the credible Jewish Haaretz source under the heading "Who are the Phoenicians really?" ? Which could add weight to the reality. By the 11th century BCE, 100 years after the Trojan War, King Saul had managed to unite most of the Israelites into a single kingdom. King Saul died fighting the Philistines and was succeeded by his only surviving son, Ishbosheth. However, the tribe of Judah succeeded from the root of the house of Saul by proclaiming David as its king, and war followed. David eventually prevailed against Ishbosheth and was pronounced the new king of Israel. King David then went on to conquer many of the surrounding areas and carve out a large empire. Biblical text state that his empire reached as far as the Euphrates River, which would have included the sea area to the north of Israel known as Hamas. King David was succeeded by his son King Solomon, who enjoyed a long and prosperous reign and vastly expanded his kingdom as explained further below. Contemporaneous with the king of Israel was the golden age of the Phoenician merchant city-state. From their bases along the coast of Lebanon, the Phoenicians began establishing trade colonies in Cyprus and then further afield in North Africa, the islands of the Western Mediterranean, and Spain. Conclusion: the understanding of all of this begins with the Israelite initial conquest of Canaan, which included the conquest of Sidon and of Urshu, the building of Tyre 150 years before the Trojan War, and the ships of Tarshish of King Hiram and King Solomon. Herodotus imagined Tartessus or Tarshish to be outside of the pillars of Heracles, which brings us to the Atlantic coast of Spain. Therein also lies the beginning of the Phoenician settlement of Cornwall, Britain, and Ireland. It appears that King Hiram of this geographical area, who had a very good relationship with King David and who supplied many building material for Solomon's temple, was Bethel, King, servant, and slave king to the commander King Solomon, whose empire stretched far and wide. Wikipedia adds some deeper insights to King Hiram. The Hebrew Bible says that he allied himself with the King David of the United Kingdom of Israel. 2 Samuel chapter 5:11, 1 Kings chapter 5 verse 1, 1 Chronicles chapter 14 verse 1. After the death of King David, Hiram continued the alliance with David's son and successor Solomon, again as an equal, meaning brothers. 1 Kings chapter 9 verse 13, Amos chapter 1 verse 9. Through the alliance with Solomon, Hiram ensured himself access to the major trade route to Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. The two kings also jointly opened a trade route over the Red Sea, connecting the Israelite harbor of Ezion-Geber with a land called Ophir. 2 Chronicles chapter 8 verse 16 and 17. Some scholars of thought suggest that this land of Ophir was the port city of Sopara, near the modern Mumbai, Bombay, India. According to the Bible, both kings grew rich through this trade, and Hiram sent Solomon architect, workmen, cedar wood, and gold to build the first temple in Jerusalem. So I'm going to continue. The next chapter will be who are the Phoenicians ready in next chapter. So I'm going to end it up here.